you are able to make some sense into the study of organization from development perspective. So let's look into what is an organization. You see, you don't see an organization, you don't touch it, you don't feel it, rather you assume that there is an organization. So basically, if you take the understanding of organization is hypothetical in nature, that is, you hypothesize that it exists. Many times you have been told that when two people come together for a specified goal, then they make an organization. But now we cannot go for that kind of definition. Things have changed. So we need to look into the very nature of organization. So it is in our own assumptions that there is an organization. Your IGNOU is an organization. You just see the buildings, you see people, but the term organization comes only in your understanding as a notion. That is why the organizations are notional constructs. They are very abstract in nature. You only can guess that this exists. You must have learnt about the different processes, different structures in organization, but you can't see communication. You see the mechanisms of communication, you see the impact of communication, you hear it, you feel it, you experience it. It's only in your experience. So that is why the organizations become a construct. You keep on constructing it, and to bring some kind of rationality, some kind of continuity, some kind of stability, you create those assumptions in your mind, you construct them, your beliefs about it, your structures, your thoughts, all these things, they become components of that construct. So we have basically the processes that are there, like leadership, communication. Then there are structures that you see in the design, that the organization, which is hierarchical, vertical, whichever way you want to see it, or it is there in the organization. And the third important thing that you have to understand, that before designing anything, we have to know why do we do it. So for that, we have to understand the organizations are large vehicles on which any society runs. Just think that tomorrow there is no transport, no water, no electricity. All these are organizations which are important for the survival of the society. So the organization's relevance, its notional value, its construction is all contingent on its contribution towards society. So you see the organizations in a holistic perspective. Then we find that what kind of systems are prominent in that, how they are affecting the lives of people, and how they are contributing meaningfully towards relating the individual to society vis-a-vis organization. So any effort to understand its development, its design, must be based in your understanding of the basic nature of organizations. This much can be told in a gist. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Then we come to a model while we are designing the organizations, which is a basic model which helps you in understanding how we go about it. You see, the two segments are there in organization. What is an organization? Iceberg. Let's forget about organization. Let's take the term iceberg. Iceberg, you see only tip of the iceberg, 10%. is visible, rest is all lying below the surface of the water. So what you see is very little. So the building, the people, and in that, if you look at the visible part, which is known as the formal organization, this consists of visible goals. You get a production goal, you get a marketing goal. So this much sales must be there, this much market share must be there. So these are all documented, very well made explicit to you, to the organizational member, and you can make easy changes because they are visible. So the visible part includes the goals, the technology, kinds of machinery, the kinds of viable, non-viable products that they are there. Then we have finance, how much money goes into it and goes out of it, both ways, simply stated. Then what kind of structure it has. Does it have a hierarchical structure? Does it have a pyramidal structure? Does it have a flat structure? All such questions are visible. You can see the organizational chart and everything becomes quite visible to you, that this is the shape and size and nature of the organization. Then another visible thing that depends on the market value is the policies. What kind of policy the organization has, which is determined by the economic circumstances, which is determined by the political circumstances, which has lots of components from the environment in which the organization exists. So the policies are developed, determined by the top bosses, and they are made transparent through the process of communication, through leadership, through various other aspects that are available to you in the organization. And lastly, we come to the products. Basically, you can divide it into two parts, the service products or the actual tangible products. So whether the organization, the formality of the organization will depend on whether it is providing service or whether it is creating something tangible which you can touch, feel, buy. Even service you can buy. And these days the trend is that the country is becoming more service oriented than production oriented, and that makes a massive change in understanding the organization, because the service includes human beings more than the technology. So this kind of interface, this kind of interaction, one has to understand in that iceberg part, which is visible, which is tangible, which is accessible and easily changed without much effort. The difficult part that you see is the informal, the invisible part. Now, invisible means which is not directly accessible, which cannot be evaluated 100%, and which is inside the individual or group, the collective mind, like that. So we have, what do we have there? We have the beliefs of people. What kind of belief the people come to work in the organization? Have they come for earning their salary at the end of the month? Do they trust the organization? Do they have some kind of loyalty, which is again based on their belief system? What kind of cultural background they are coming off from? Are they believers or they not believers? Like that. Then we have assumptions. That is also inside the individual, inside the mind, inside the collective. So what kind of assumptions do they have? I'll give you one example of assumptions. These days the change, the development is always thought to be in science, okay, in technology. But look at the world scenario. People do not have that kind of faith in those assumptions that science and technology can take you towards the biggest possible height, because you see the whole society, the whole world is in a flux. There is terrorism, there is a visible effort to destroy the systems. So the assumptions are very important for a person, whether the person is trained in technology or medicine or wherever. His assumptions, his values, they are not directly accessible. That is why they are the hidden part of that iceberg. What kind of perceptions? Perceptions are based on your prior knowledge. It's just not the direct interaction with the object, but how you perceive it, how you understand it. That is also important. So how employees perceive the organization, also a very important aspect in understanding the design of the organization. You can provide the best of the facilities, but if they are not perceived as the best, then it's not going to have any impact. Then we come to another set, that is attitudes. Whether the attitudes are positive, they are going in the direction desired by the organizational policies. Alright. Then we have feelings. What kind of feelings that the people who work, who transact with the organization, how do they feel about it? Do they feel good? Do they feel bad? Do they feel neutral? All such things are, at the end of the day, going to contribute towards the development of the organization. Then values, very important concern, that in these days the organizations are facing a lot of attrition, meaning that the material values have become predominant, and you don't look at how much salary you pay and you are assured that the person is going to stay. No, it is the value. What kind of socialization, what kind of cultural inputs that have been put in the individual while he was growing up, while he came to join. So just materialistic values are not going to take any individual or organization to the desired heights. You must have the proper social understanding, social values, spiritual values, and other values that can be inculcated through the socialization processes. And then we have interpersonal interactions, which you just see if the people are fighting. If they are having friendship, you try to just assume that there is friendship or there is conflict. So they are also hidden behind the minds of the people. So interpersonal interaction, understanding that is also very important. Then we have group norms. Now group norms may be dependent on the kind of context the organization provides, then which group is given the priority. Many organizations are there which are giving a priority to their marketing forces. They are least bothered, maybe with nominally bothered about their products, their human resources. All such things, they matter because they are going to decide upon the group norm, and these normative patterns are at the end of the day going to decide what kind of behavior you would be expecting from people, and that is going to decide what kind of development processes you are going to initiate, what kind of design that you may possibly have about the organization and its existence. Now let's examine some of the myths that are prevalent about organization. What are they? It is assumed, it's a myth, that satisfied workers are more productive than dissatisfied. Lots of studies have shown that there is no difference, hardly any difference. You have to understand that satisfaction term is contingent upon a hidden assumption, and that is attitude. So even if the dissatisfied worker is there, he may be working in the same competent manner as satisfied ones, or satisfied ones may be having a laid back attitude, so they won't be working. So it is a myth that if you keep your workers satisfied, they will be producing more. So again we are going back to the material values, because most of the times we believe that if you pay the worker more, then he is going to be more productive. It's not so. Then another myth is bureaucracies are inefficient. Bureaucracies are rampant. They are there. And bureaucracy tells you, the true bureaucracy tells you about a professional attitude that the individual, that the people, that the members have about the organization. So bureaucracy, without bureaucracy, organizations many a time fall flat on their face. You have to have some norms, you have to have some rules, you have to have some work ethics. Bureaucracy must be well understood to put it into motion. Alright, so bureaucracies are not inefficient. Then another myth is that workers want challenging jobs. This is again, the studies have proved to be wrong. Workers, unless until provided with the kind of context which is supportive, which is nurturant, which suits their own competencies, their skills, their attitudes, their life, they are not going to ask for challenging jobs. After all, they are going to be paid, whether they are working in a mundane job or they are looking for challenges, because challenging jobs means that they are trying to create some uncertainties. Challenges are always accompanied by uncertainties that create anxieties. So challenge is not the only thing that you look for when you are working. So workers always do not want challenging jobs. You have to provide, as an organizational manager, you have to provide them with the kind of context, with the kind of setup that will create that kind of mindset. This is the hidden part. That mindset has to be created to expect the workers that they would be ready to have challenging jobs. Then another myth is about the groups. Cohesive groups are more efficient. It's not so. Cohesive groups can lay down the informal rules and put a stop to people working, trying to evade the norms. They would be putting a pressure on individuals not to go beyond the norm. So cohesive groups are not always efficient. It is the organizational design, its orientation towards development, that is going to bring in efficiency in groups. And you don't expect cohesiveness all the time in cross-functional groups. You don't expect in cohesiveness in groups when there are strangers meeting. So this is a myth. We have to look at, examine it in a holistic perspective, and then make these kinds of assumptions that cohesive groups are more efficient decision makers. So this is, we have to be very careful. Then we come to the one of very important myths, that money brings happiness to employees. It is not so. Money is always not a satisfier, and we have theoretical assumptions which are working. Even people like Herbert, Maslow, all these people have said that money is required up to a level. After that it loses its value, its potency. So we have to be very careful in designing the incentive systems, reward systems, understanding people's financial needs and the other needs which money satisfy, but to a limited extent. So one cannot just depend on financial aspect to say that we have satisfied workers. You see, another question that we are now going to examine, why study organizations, which is going to be relevant for designing the organizations. First, we had already said that organizations need them. So, if organizations need them, then we must have efficient, proficient, competent organizations. So, there has to be a synergistic relationship between the society and organizations, and for that organizations are created from the society. So what kind of organizations the society wants and the needs determine the nature of the organization. So you need to study whether the organization is actually fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. So here you need to understand that if you needed something, is it fulfilling that? So study it. Without studying the organizations, you cannot go ahead. Then the usual explanation that organizations bring people together. When a person, whether he is Lakshmi Mittal or Ambani, a person cannot achieve collective goal. Alright, so we need people together, and studying organizations mean studying people. So for achieving the collective goal, one needs to study it and then find out that does the collective goal reach out to the people. Okay, so this will be only feasible, possible if you study the organization, the relationship between the individual and the collective goal, because the individual does not remain an isolated body. He or she becomes a part of the totality. So this collective goal, is that person able to relate to the collectivity or not? This part is required and is a very important aspect to be studied, and this can be done only by studying the organization. Then organizations, when they are made into practice, they create systems. There are socio-technical systems, there are interpersonal systems, there are group systems, various systems, there are management systems, and these systems are required to put planning and other activities into place, because systems are always starting somewhere, ending somewhere, and by the end giving a feedback which helps in creating a new start. So the organizational studies, the understanding of the design of the organization will tell you whether it has been able to create functional systems, effective systems, and whether the achievement, whether the output has been up to the mark or going towards development is understood by understanding the organization. Then of course organizations provide a voice to the individual. It's a collective voice. When a laborer as an individual cannot raise his voice, he has the union. That's also an organization. So it gives that's a very important part of the organization, whether it is a productive organization or a service-oriented organization, it is continuously giving voice to the individuals, whether that individual is a customer, employee, or anything, even a child. The organizations, if they are polluting the environment, the child gets affected. So every individual gets a voice through the organization. Is that voice being heard? Is that voice being taken care of? Those things can be only available, understandable, if you study the organization. And then lastly we have excuse me, they help both the society and the individual grow, and this is what we are mainly here to discuss, that growth process, that renewal process, that vision, developing of the vision, both for the individual as well as for the society, and this is done through the medium of organizations. Now we come to the main focus, and that is coming to organizational development. Now before this, I would like to introduce you towards the designing part because design and development are interrelated, they are correlated variables. What do we mean by organizational design before we go into organizational development? Basically, the design is around two basic aspects. One is the process meaning, which is relating the employee to his or her competencies like skills, okay, and at a larger extent the competency. Now this competency is developed through the process, that is the communication, the leadership, the intergroup processes, the intragroup processes. There we look at the design, and this design in a theoretical sense are emanating from the processes of motivation, processes of attitude formation, processes of socialization, processes of reward allocation, processes which decide the financial nature, and so on and so forth. This is one part of the design, and the other part is where you are looking at the structural part, that is how the decision making flows in the organization. Structure basically tells you about the flow of the decision making. Alright, now in the decision making, if it is centralized, then a group or one individual becomes responsible for initiating, processing and implementing. So we have the larger segment of the population has a very little input or contribution towards the decision making, but they are affected by the implementation. So there is a gap that is created, centralized kind of design. It is easier for the management because you can immediately pinpoint the responsibility, and in designing anything, whether it is leadership design or decision making design or motivational design, if it is just held in the hands of a chosen few, then you have to be sure that these are the best people who are available. So best leader manager, best personnel that you select at the top, and transparency is affected because it is again a hidden part. The mind of those people who are initiated in those processes, there the problem comes when it is implemented, and people who are getting affected or putting their decisions into practice, they do not know much around what went in making such a decision. So centralized designs have their good points and also have their negative points. And the other way is decentralization. People are talking about the flat structure. Now flat structure, it is quite attractive, but as far as the decision making, designing processes are concerned, they become little ambiguous, they become little vague, because you can't pin down any specific group or individual as the responsibility holder. Alright, now there the decision is participative, democratic, but responsibility is also diffused. Alright, if the responsibility is diffused, then something goes wrong. If the decision is not implemented in the way it was envisioned, who is to be responsible? The group, collective responsibility, and naturally the whole thing becomes quite diffused in order. So centrality of design and decentralization both are laden with their positive points and their negative points. It is the organizational vision that has to decide how they are going to design the organization. And if you are going for a centralized organizational design, the development perspective is going to be different than when it is a decentralized design. So designs are integrally related to the perspectives that are there in the development orientation. Now development, before we go into the definition of it and its nitty-gritty details, let me also introduce you to certain aspects that how development process has been perceived in various ways by various authors. Like, if you take up the humanistic perspective, it calls upon the development as a growth in the person, and that growth is reflected in his or her behavior in the organization. So the central point from this perspective, we have the individual, human being, by giving that person the required dignity, required respect, and honoring what the individual has to say, has to do, wants to do. Humanistic perspective of development always calls upon the welfare mechanism to be put into as a prime aspect of development. The other way is where you are, other perspective in development is where you are looking at those forces which are important from both the perspective, that is, develop the skills which are relevant for the organization. If certain technical skills are required by the organization, that is becoming a techno-structural development. We'll come into the interventions a little later, but you must know what is the perspective. If it is totally management perspective, then profit related development, how the organizations become more profitable, how they contribute towards the enhancement of the national development projects, products, the GDP, or how it contributes towards the development of the organization so that they can function nationally, internationally. Here it is very important for us to understand the fact that compare China and India. China is managing multiple organizations in the West, in the non-Chinese territory, whether it is in the Asian locale or in the European or American. They have made a dent. India has not been able to do that, though one organization like Tata or ONGC buys some stake somewhere and we are saying that this is development. This is not development. They are not creating an imprint. So if you want this perspective of understanding development, then you have to go to beyond the national boundaries, and this is known as the impact study of development. If the developmental perspective is based on the impact of the projects, the products, then you have to look at the national boundaries and international boundaries, and then the questions become more complicated, because how do you cater to the demands that are not understood within your national perspective, within your socialization perspective. So these aspects have to be understood. And then another very important perspective in development is where you are looking entirely at the spectrum from a social perspective. And the question is raised, but that at the end of the day, how does the society gain? How does the individual gain? So we have organizations like UNDP, some national commissions which go into taking up the deprived lot. Organizations have to contribute. There is the image building, where you are looking at the level of deprivation, something which is lacking, and you are fulfilling, you are making efforts to fulfill those gaps, whether those gaps are in poverty, those gaps are in education, those gaps in health. All such are given the garb of development, but they are actually filling in the blanks, the gaps that are there, and these are also development, because unless until you fulfill the gaps, you can't expect any growth, any possibility of renewal. So these are some of the perspectives which need to be understood before you go into organizational development, and these are integrated with the understanding of the nature of the organization and the kind of design that the organization has. Any questions that you may have, you are welcome. Otherwise we go into the definition of the organizational development. Now the foremost, the top thing in defining organization is top management must support it. Any effort, whether it at national level or at international level, you must have, for the national level you must have the blessings of the PM, his group, the parliament, the president. At the international you must have the blessings of Bush or Gordon Brown and the people who are powerful. Top management reflects what? It reflects the power. And if you are not blessed, if you are not supported by power, no development can take place. That is, one can give it in writing. Any project, any process, any effort, if it has to be put into practice, it has to be supported by the top boss. You may have American top boss, you may have Canadian top boss, you may have Chinese top boss. At the international context of the development of the organization, that is a prerequisite for development process. Then organizational development is a long range effort. It is not a short term myopic perspective. What you need is put in an effort which is going to be there for the future to come in, and this has a very relevant aspect, impact, because short range efforts do not take you anywhere for a stable import, for a stable impact. So what is the problem that is going to be faced in the long term? You see, the nuclear participation, the arrangement that recently our country has made, is now projected into a 400 years of agreement. This is long range, that the country becomes self-sufficient in power generation with the help of nuclear machinery. Now what message tells you? What is the message that you get? Here is, there is a problem of power efficiency. Nuclear power is one of the alternatives, and the US is going to help us, but there are certain strings attached. So problem solving should not be short term so that it creates problems for itself in the long term. This is one thing that one has to remember, problem solving efforts. And then another long range process is renewal.
I think we'll stop here for the session, for this session. We had an interesting discussion about the organizations. What are organizations? What are the myths about organizations? And why do we have to study organizations? I think it was very, very interesting, and I expected that there will be few questions, but we are disappointed. I request all the regional centers who are present there to raise some questions, to interact more. We will continue this discussion in the coming session. Thank you.